All right, joining us, MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter and the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, who is miraculously still awake up there in Chappaqua. MS Now political analyst and the Atlantic staff writer, Ashley Parker, and MS Now senior legal reporter, Lisa Rubin. Ali, you amaze me every single day, especially when you can stick around for as long as you have. Tell me, I mean, we're 2.5 hours in, and there was a pause because there was a leak of a photo. Explain why that is against the rules and why Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, is trying to use that to say, open this thing up.
Katie, we've got the caffeine, and we're going to be here for as long as it takes because there have been some twists and turns today. In theory, this was supposed to be a closed-door deposition, haggled over for several months, happening in large part because Congress was about to vote on a contempt of Congress referral that would have put the Clintons in different legal territory for defying a subpoena. That got pulled back because the Clintons ultimately agreed to do this deposition privately here in Chappaqua near their home. But the reason that things got gummed up just in the last hour or so is because Lauren Boebert, Republican congresswoman on the committee, apparently passed along a photo of Clinton behind closed doors during that deposition, doing nothing but testifying. But that is in defiance of the rules of this appearance. You see it there on the screen. That then, of course, started circulating. A Clinton spokesperson, Nick Merrill, came out to the cameras and said, we're putting this committee hearing on pause, this deposition on pause because of that leak. Behind closed doors, then, I'm told by a source directly familiar that Clinton's lawyer and Clinton asked Comer to then let press be allowed into this deposition, sort of dovetails off of the way that she wanted this to be public in the first place. Comer conferred with an attorney, ultimately came back, said, no, we're not going to bring press in. And a Clinton attorney basically said, I need you to manage your members better because this is in defiance of the rules that we set. And I think that really does speak to the pretty adversarial tone that could be going on behind closed doors. Republicans, to my understanding, have finished their questioning. Democrats are doing their questioning now. And we'll see what we see when they start coming out of that room. Do we hear from anyone who can give us better light? But I think for those of us who have talked about the Clintons as a duo for so long, there are really stark differences, Katie, between what Hillary Clinton is expected to be asked about today, which are frankly, there's a lot of questions about why she's here in the first place. Really, it seems to answer for her husband and information that he might have and relationships that he might have had with Epstein. And then, of course, that brings us to tomorrow's deposition with the former president, where I think there are questions that are valid to ask him about the relationship that he might have had with Epstein, with Maxwell, why he's featured in some of those photos that have been part of the Epstein estate and the DOJ files dumps that we've seen. And I think those are different questions. So as much as they have gone through this process, negotiating their depositions together, having a public posture on this together, there really are two separate figures in terms of what the committee could actually glean from them. And I think that's important for us to point out here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, Lisa, let's talk about how Clinton appears in the Epstein files. I mentioned up top that there are a lot of news articles about her run. That's the majority of it. She says she never believes she even met Jeffrey Epstein, but there was a relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. What are the circumstances surrounding that relationship?
Ghislaine Maxwell, after she broke up with Jeffrey Epstein, had a long-standing romantic relationship with a man named Ted Waite. Ted Waite was a friend of both Clintons. He was a guest at Chelsea Clinton's wedding. It's in that capacity we understand that Ghislaine Maxwell then also attended Chelsea Clinton's wedding. And a photograph that has been seen many times over Ghislaine Maxwell on the aisle, seen in a photograph of Chelsea being walked down the aisle flanked by her parents on either side. So we understand that Ghislaine Maxwell was not invited to Chelsea Clinton's wedding in her own behalf, but was rather the plus one of a longstanding friend of the Clintons in 2010. However, there are some other things in the file that might be pertinent to ask Hillary Clinton about, if only so that she can exclude the possibility that she was aware of them. For example, now Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, in behavior that is sort of common to many Wall Street executives, appeared to have been playing both sides of the aisle in the 2016 election and invited Jeffrey Epstein to come to a fundraising reception for Hillary Rodham Clinton. It would be interesting to understand from Secretary Clinton's perspective, did she have any understanding who was invited? Did Jeffrey Epstein, in fact, come to that fundraising reception? My expectation is the answer is going to be no and no. But I also expect that members, particularly on the GOP side of the aisle, would ask her about that today.
So, Ali, you talked to Jim Comer, the chairman of House Oversight, about Howard Lutnick specifically. What did he say?
Well, I asked about Lutnick because Comer, before this deposition, was talking about the ways that getting the Clintons on a subpoena in the first place was done in bipartisan fashion, and that they are trying to do this investigation in a nonpartisan way. And I think in theory that might be true, except for the fact that when it comes to practice, politics is very much enmeshed in all of the actions of this committee. It extends to the way that obviously Democrats say, if you want to talk to former President Clinton, why are you also not wanting to talk to President Trump? He is mentioned multiple times in the files. There are serious questions about DOJ and the level of information that they've put out about allegations around the president. But it wasn't just Trump who I asked about, and I'll let you hear what I asked Comer and what he said. Watch. With the spirit of bipartisanship, would you then ask the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick to come testify? It seems like he has some information.
That's very possible, and I think I think it's a good possibility that his name will arise in some questioning today. We've already brought in Alex Acosta and Bill Barr for depositions. That's two Republicans in the Trump administration. So this isn't just about Democrats. We know that obviously Maxwell was a guest at Chelsea Clinton's wedding. There weren't many people that went to that wedding. So, again, we're not accusing Hillary Clinton of wrongdoing.
And I have to tell you, Katie, I've actually asked Comer about bringing Lutnick in a few times in the past on Capitol Hill. Him saying today that's very possible is a change from the way he typically answers those questions. And it's one I can tell you Democrats are prepared to pounce on.
Yeah, let's talk about the other part of that soundbite, Ashley, and that is Jim Comer talking about how, well, we brought in Bill Barr, we brought in Alex Acosta. See, this is bipartisan, but these are former officials that Donald Trump's not even on good terms with. Bill Barr, didn't do Donald Trump's bidding in 2020 when he tried to overturn the results of the election. Alex Acosta got kicked out of the administration early on after the Epstein stuff got into the news all over again because of that sweetheart deal. Can he arguably say that they're being totally fair to everybody, politically speaking, involved in the Epstein files by just pointing out these two people?
No, those people's ties to the Epstein files are incredibly different than some of the other ties of people who were close personal friends with Jeffrey Epstein, Democrats and Republicans, who flew on his plane, who visited his island, who were in photos with young women. It's a very different type of Republican, out of the president's orbit, not on good terms with the president, and not featured in these problematic photos, not featured in these emails in this particular problematic type of way. That's not to say the sweetheart deal by Alex Acosta was not problematic, but it's just a very different side. And the reason Bill Clinton, for instance, is being asked to come in and testify is night and day from Bill Barr and Alex Acosta.
Yeah. The president's mentioned a whole lot, Lisa, in these files, and including, listen, being mentioned in the files, being photographed with Jeffrey Epstein, even being photographed with some of the girls, not necessarily criminal behavior. And obviously people involved have denied any criminal wrongdoing or any wrongdoing, period, other than maybe bad judgment. Not the president, though. He's never said that in terms of bad judgment. He's denied criminal activity. But he's in a lot of photos and is in a lot of videos. He was very chummy with him. And there's including one allegation, very serious allegation, against President Trump that was not even in the released documents, that somehow did not get released, even though by law they needed to get released. Wouldn't this committee, if they're trying to get answers, want to get to the bottom of that?
They should want to get to the bottom of that, and they should want to get to the bottom of any missing files. Katie, the documents that we understand to be missing were listed on an index of witness statements that cover more than 540 witnesses. If we think that this is the only person for whom witness statements are missing, either in the form of handwritten notes from an FBI interview or a memoranda from an FBI interview, I think we're deluding ourselves. We already can see that there are indicia of other missing documents. Now, do all of those people have allegations against the current president of the United States? Almost certainly no. But there is something deeply off about the fact that prior witness statements prepared for and compiled for Ghislaine Maxwell and her criminal defense, things that are directly within the wheelhouse of what's supposed to be produced in response to the act, would be missing. And it's troubling that these 3 documents in particular are missing. Witness credibility is not a basis for withholding documents under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. That's for the public to judge. And if the White House wants to mount that defense, let them do it. But the fact that they've withheld these documents in and of itself suggests that they are not complying with the act, and not complying with the act in a way that is likely much more widespread than what we see with respect to this one particular Trump accuser.